So increasingly, success in the information economy is not simply about being a trusted source of content, alongside all the other thousands of content sources. It's about becoming a seamless and vital part of the customer's daily workflow by solving problems and offering products they can't get anywhere else. Truly must-have product and information. It's a big change for media organizations for whom speed to market and a culture of failure does not come naturally. Anita Zielina, Director of News Innovation and Leadership at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism and former Chief Product Officer at NZZ Media Group in Zurich, will show us how information companies can succeed by building a strong product culture that allows them to truly innovate. Please welcome Anita.
Hello everyone, and thanks for bringing me in from New York, where winter has kind of officially started yesterday, so it's so much nicer here in Margaritaville in Florida. And I think many of you will feel this way. So before we kick it off, just a few words about me. What do? I basically train leaders in the media and innovation industry and in information companies to become more effective in driving change and transformation, and part of that involves product strategy and product thinking. So if you're interested in any of that, I'll be around, so catch me later. Today, I'll talk a little bit to you about the importance of product culture and product thinking for the information industry. And the question that I want to pose here is product culture, basically the thing that might help us as an industry transform and innovate and find new sustainable business models. I like to give this talk kind of a little addendum because this talk is also a lot about culture change, and all of you, just as I am in working in media organizations, work in an industry that is being entirely disrupted because consumer behaviors change, monetization changes, the way we build our offerings and distribute them changes. So culture changes kind of the red thread that accompanies all of our industries through that process. So basically this talk could also be called How to Change Organizations That Do Not Want to Change. And I think, well, me having worked in many legacy organizations that were in that process of digital disruption can for sure tell a few stories about that, and maybe some others in the room can as well. So let's dive a bit deeper into product thinking. And many of you might have realized that over the last 1 or 2 years, product has become this huge topic of conversation. If you look at business media, 2019, it seemed like this emerging thing, like suddenly everyone was talking about building products, driving innovation with product thinking, developing user-centered product strategies. So that sounds like it's a very new thing, right? It wasn't there before. Well, actually, the funny thing is it's not that new, because that is just an exemplary study that I picked, but actually there have been big research projects done over the last 10 years or so about the state of product thinking and product strategy, basically connecting the importance of product with business success. So it's not that new. So did it start 2010 with these big research projects? Not really, because if you look back a bit further in time and look into the 90s, that was actually when many of the product frameworks that we work with today, think about agile methodologies, think about Scrum methodologies, when many of these frameworks and methods were developed. So we're already like back in the 90s when big tech companies started to use these frameworks and these workflows. So is that when it started, the whole product thing? Well, you could have guessed we are going a bit further back, and that is hard to read, but it doesn't exist in a higher resolution. So that is basically the beginning, what is today being perceived as the beginning of product, or the product thinking. And that's a memo from Neil McElroy from Procter & Gamble, who invented for the first time a group of people he at that time called the brand teams, or frankly he called them the brand men, because there weren't that many women in the industry at that time. And he basically said, well, these are the people that constantly think about your customer, the people that constantly sit down and say, is that really, are we building what the customer wants? Are we fulfilling the needs our clients or consumers have? And that is, nowadays, you could say that is like the ultimate, like the beginning of product centricity. So we're back in the 1930s here now, so one good question would be, if we knew all that so long ago, why did this whole process take so long to actually gain traction in the information and media industries? And that's, frankly, an interesting question. And part of the answer is that the way that the industry traditionally works is kind of the opposite of what would you describe as product thinking. And I'll dig a bit deeper into what I mean by this. Ultimately, when you think about products, and all of you are offering and building products to a certain extent, these might be software products, it might be services that you offer, it might be apps or digital products, but all of you are designing products and serving an audience with these products as the means of your companies. And there are some questions associated with how you do this and how you basically serve your audiences. And these questions, when you think about them, say a lot about the culture that you have in your organization. And when you think about the question of what you build, who decides what products are being built? What is your strategic process to identify which products serve a certain audience? The question of who builds these products. Do you have dedicated product teams? Or is it basically the boss saying, I think we should really build this, and telling developers and marketing teams to just build it without any user research? That's a very different way of working in product. How do you build things? Do you have a user-centered process where you early on start to include customer feedback? Or do you basically spend a lot of money, which would be the very traditional way to do things, build something, and when it's done, you show it to the client for the very first time, and then maybe end up with him not liking what he or she sees? Why do you build what you built? Do you have a strategy in place that is very consistent with how you build products? Do you have a strategy in place that makes it very clear for you and all your employees in your organizations why you do what you do? What is your ultimate goal with selling these products and building these products? When do you build products? Now, what do I mean by that? It's a big decision whether you want to be the first mover in an industry, risking to spend a lot of money, but then, of course, hopefully having the big advantage of being a first mover in a large market or an emerging market. Or are you rather comfortable being late to the game and confident that this will help you learn from the mistakes others make and not make them yourselves? None of that is better or worse, but it's a big strategic decision, and especially when you build digital products, it's a decision you should consciously make and work on making. And how do you measure what you built? How do you measure success? That is one of the biggest questions, and that we are seeing in the industries that the ones that are a bit further advanced in their innovation journey usually have a very, very dedicated set of success measurements, KPIs, metrics, whatever you might call them. So they basically know what success means for them. And they know how to translate that into their organization, which helps to kind of rally the herd in a way and helps to, gather employees around a certain goal. Because if you don't know what that goal is, it's very hard to get someone motivated to build something a certain way. So that being said, I'd like to kind of go through some points that I think might help you to assess where your organization is at and maybe trigger a little thought process about your innovation journey. And these are some differentiating factors between I call it the old culture, and a new product-oriented culture. And some of the dominant features that we see in the information and media industries. So traditionally, there is something of a lonely wolf culture in many of our industries that basically says, if you are working in a certain area of your company, you just try to focus on getting done what you do best, and there is not that much collaboration going on with other teams or in interdisciplinary teams. Now we see when we look at, for example, some of the biggest, most successful tech players in the world, think about Google or Microsoft, that they really broke up the silos that they used to have, because they also had the silos, but they really broke up these silos, and they now work much more collaboratively with product people, marketing people, people from the tech team, people from the R&D team, people from sales, together in a room, developing products for a certain audience. And that's a that is something that also in most of the research, you can see that is a differentiating factor. That has immediate impact on the bottom line. If your salespeople, your marketing people, your designers, your UX researchers are not in the room when the product decisions are being made, that is a bad situation to be in, and something you should figure out how to solve. And again, that builds on, and one point that builds on that is the interdisciplinary work. Diverse teams perform better, and diversity means diversity of all means. Diversity means gender diversity, diversity means people of color, diversity means people from different communities, but diversity also means not kind of segregating the tech teams and saying, well, you know, we're just gonna ultimately give them what they are supposed to build when we are done with the design process, but rather having an interdisciplinary and diverse team from the very beginning of the product design process on. With change comes the need for a new leadership style. And many of us in traditional industries come from a place where leadership is perceived as being the strong person that knows everything on top of the pyramid. And if you work in such a changing world as we do, no manager, no boss, no CEO, how great he or she might be, can have all the answers. Working in this disruptive environment means you have to rely on people in your teams to be smarter than you are. And that is a very tough thing for some people who didn't grow up like that. For some people who still feel that leadership means strength, and strength means no weaknesses, and no weaknesses means having answers to all questions. That is just not working anymore. And again, if you look at the big and successful tech players, you'll see that while they don't have flat hierarchies, so what I'm talking about is different from, you know, these ideas and visions of holacracy where there is no boss anymore and it's all very collaborative. The successful models still say, well, there needs to be someone who ultimately makes decisions. But what we see is that basically the aspects of coaching your employees to become more independent, to make bigger decisions themselves, to have teams that they are responsible for, basically delegating part of the responsibility for transformation in the organization and empowering people to live up to that responsibility is really something that differentiates the successful players from the not so successful ones. Perfectionism. Growing up in an industry that for many years, and now I'm talking about the media industry, you basically created something, a newspaper, and you wanted to make sure that there was not one mistake in it, because then you print it, and then you sent it out to an audience. Now, with digital publishing, of course, you still try to make sure to not put mistakes in your newspapers or your publications or your apps, but you're working with a constant flow of information. You're working with a constant stream of a changing product. You're never done. You basically reiterate constantly. That, of course, is tough to change if you work in an organization that used to have this building something, making it perfect, and then pushing it out to the market system. What a culture of failure, and that is something many of you will have heard about, that sometimes a bit hyped Silicon Valley-esque thinking of a culture of failure is so important, we need to embrace failure. Well, you know, that is easier said than done, right? Because ultimately, all of us like to win, so we are not that excited about failing. But what it ultimately means is a culture of failure means to empower your teams, your employees, to experiment. It means empowering them to make their own decisions, because if you don't, you're not going to have creativity in the room. And if you don't allow creativity in the room, you're not going to tackle the business challenges that you need to tackle today. So that sometimes means accepting that something might go wrong. You're not going to find a solution for a problem if you only rely on 100% tested solutions. Experimentation includes a certain amount of failure, and organizations need to learn how to live with that. When we move a bit more towards the tech and the process and workflow side of things, many of us grew up in organizations that had kind of this typical waterfall development process. Someone designed a product or an app at a certain point in time, and then you basically say, oh yeah, in Q3 2020-21, we're going to build the front page, and you know, so the next 3 years are perfectly planned out. Let's just do it that way. Let's hope nothing happens. Well, see, the surprising thing is something happens all the time, right? Who in this room who's ever built a digital product? Is there anyone who ever built it exactly in time, like finished it exactly at that point in time when you planned it? There is no digital product development process that doesn't have unexpected turbulences, so to speak. So coming into a process that allows for agility and that allows to, you know, kind of reshape the process while you go, a more iterative development process is something that really helps you also with the speed of your building process. One process that many organizations now move that are doing a great job in becoming quicker, also some large consumer brands, is they move to something called the design sprints, and some of you might have heard about that. A design sprint is a process where you basically put this whole product team into a room for 1 week or 2 weeks at a time. Designers, developers, marketeers, salespeople, UX researchers. And you basically, in a very condensed and short period of time, build something from scratch. Now, what that does is it brings people into the room together and it gets them into this, you know, working with pizza kind of in a more informal atmosphere and really getting something done in 5 days or 10 days. And without the distractions that the daily business routines bring, like, oh, we have this meeting here and I have to leave a little early there, and you really get things done in a much shorter and much more intense period of time. So that's something that I always encourage people to look into. There are some great resources online about design sprints, if you just Google that, that you can find. Last but not least, one differentiating factor between this old world and new world thinking is really who makes the decisions. I touched upon that a little bit before. Are we an organization with what I like to call an egocentric view? So we just like to build what we like to build. We don't really want to know what the clients want, right? Because they can be pretty annoying, if we're honest. So we're like, yeah, you know what? We are convinced that this is great. If they don't buy it, well, they are just not smart enough. But we're going to continue to build things the way we built. I'm exaggerating here a little, but just a little, because I actually heard statements like this in many, many boardrooms in organizations. Or do we have a true user-centric view? A view that really starts with the customer. A view that really starts with the client and starts to identify what needs are there that we as an organization can fulfill. And of course, and that is not a secret or a surprise for many of you for sure, where there are needs to fulfill, where there is potential excitement from a customer or client, there is also a willingness to pay and a willingness to invest in your products. And last point on this list is about data. And the very traditional way, again, to get things done is really having a gut feeling of how something could work or how you could tackle a new market segment, and not even asking for data, or if there is data, maybe even ignoring it. Now, that is kind of a double-edged sword, this point, because there is the possibility to move too much into the data world if you don't listen to gut feeling anymore, if you don't rely on your best and experienced salesmen that tell you, well, this is actually what's happening in the market. That is bad. Then you kind of oversteered towards the data direction. Jeff Bezos basically said in a quote that he wanted to make Amazon data-informed, not data-driven. And I actually think that's a very good way to put it. You need to understand your client. You need to have all the data necessary to build the right products. But you're fine to make educated executive decisions at some point where you say, we know that this is the way, but we still feel we should combine it, combined with our gut feeling and our experience. This is what we should do. Now, we talked about product now for 12, 14 minutes. We didn't really say what product is, right? Well, maybe we should try to move to a definition here. And you'll see that one of the signs that this part of discussion is still kind of an ongoing debate is that there is not really one definition that everyone, both on the scientific side and the product business side, can agree upon. So I wrote my own one because, you know, that's what you do if you are in academia and can just write up definitions. Product is a function, and this one is for the media industry, but you can pretty much exchange media with several other industries. Product is a function at the intersection of editorial, tech, and business that actively ensures that all products and services a media organization creates address user needs, provide an excellent user experience, and advance the overarching business strategy. Now you can, as you see, that would work just as well for the information industry or business media industry. And I think it really makes clear that the user centricity, the user orientation and customer orientation is really the backbone of product thinking. In a media company, you'd say we need to find the sweet spot between the modern product culture, the thing that we talked about right now, and the traditional media culture. And for any other industry, I'll say it's not that different because it basically means figure out what the new processes, workflows, data-driven methods are that can help you be successful in your organization and combine it with the established processes that you want to keep, combine it with the knowledge about your clients and customers that you already have, and combine it with the gut feeling that you have, the insights from your experienced team, the insights from your salespeople, the insights from your user researchers that you have on board. Now we come to a part where I hopefully trigger some thinking in your organizations where you're at the moment. So there are roughly 4 different stages that content organizations are in right now when it comes to product mindset. So the first one is really no dedicated product team, no product or innovation processes in place, and very little customer focus. Now, it's not terrible if you're in that stage. It just means that there is some transformation work to go. And I wouldn't be surprised, all of the media organizations, when I started my job there, all of them were in this stage. I never entered a legacy organization that already had it all figured out. So it's not a bad place to be, but it means that there is transformation work to do. Usually an indicator for this phase is that many people in the organization, if you ask them what product processes do we have, they might not even know the answer, because there is no product thinking, product isn't part of the strategy. That might be an indicator that you're still in this stage or borderlining to the next one. The next stage is really, you do have some product people, you might have a small product people group in place, you do some experiments, user-centered product design, for example, but you somehow lack the high-level buy-in or stringent processes and KPI. So that's usually a phase that I like to compare with like awakening to a certain extent. So you start to experiment, you maybe do an experiment with user-centered design, you maybe bring in a potential new group of clients and do a listening process with them before you build a new app. You get someone on board who runs, even if it's a 1 or 2 person team, who runs product and runs UX. But usually there is no process or KPI set attached to that. So usually you don't yet, you're not yet at the stage where you can replicate the successes. It's more kind of a, throwing spaghetti to the wall to a certain extent and seeing what sticks. Now, a typical indicator is exactly when you have these conversations of a lot of experiments starting, bubbling up, going on, but it's hard for you as an organization yet to identify which of these will lead to a real process or will become your way of doing product. So that would be an indicator. The third stage is really, you do have a product team and processes with usual roles like product manager, product designer, UX designer, tech responsible, product owner, and a person driving the marketing/business side of things. They function, they have workflows, they have routines, they maybe use design sprints or other methods, but they are often an isolated part of the company. And they often, and that is something that several of you might have seen already, they are an emerging part of the company, so usually there is some conflict with the more legacy parts attached to this phase. So usually what happens at this phase is parts of the organization kind of raise their hand and say, oh, I think that actually should be a marketing project. So I hear some laughs in the room because I really feel that is like such a typical indicator that you at least starting to touch that phase. So it's like, no, I think that should be ours. We don't want to, that shouldn't be product. We don't want to do anything interdisciplinary. It should be ours. That is not a bad phase, but you need leadership to be, that can become a dangerous phase if you don't have leadership clear in, aligning the organization around the goals, aligning them around KPIs, and making very clear executive decisions in this is what the product team is responsible for, this is what the marketing team is responsible for, this is what the tech team is responsible for. So here we're in a phase where there are a lot of challenges for the leaders, the team leaders, but also the C-level of the organization. And last but not least, we're at a stage where product has a seat at the table at C-level. Now that could either be through someone who is the chief digital officer or chief product officer of kinds. Sometimes in some organizations, this role is housed with the chief marketing officer, because sometimes marketing is the place that includes a lot of the user centricity and product thinking. And sometimes you might have a CEO who is really the kind of chief product thinker in your organization. But in any case, this means that product decisions are being made at the highest level possible in the organization, and usually that user centricity and your relationship with your client base, and also the KPIs for success are relatively well known in the organization and are kind of agreed upon. Now, don't get me wrong, this phase does not mean that, check, we're all set, we can stop working on innovation right now. It just means that you reached a certain level that makes it easier to replicate processes and makes it easier to grow and scale, but it still means that you constantly have to refresh this new memory. It's still new for the organization, so it still means you have to re-communicate the strategic parts of product thinking. You have to constantly be sure to upskill your leaders in the organization. So it's still a lot of culture work, but you're at a better point in terms of scalability and growth. Now let's talk about some of the major challenges ahead when it comes to product thinking and product strategy. One of them, and I touched upon that in my last sentence, is really finding and training the right talent and developing your talent and your leaders to drive this transformation process. And actually, that is a much larger point than just product. Many of you will have been in the position to hire for a role such as a digital app developer, or a content strategist, or a UX designer. And many of you will have realized the same thing that I realized working in the media industry. It's very, very hard to find good people. And the reason that it's hard is, well, for many, it sounds very cool to work in a Google or Facebook office with free food and slides that you can use to slide into your office in the morning. But then also, it's very hard because all of us compete for the same people, right? That is not an industry-specific skill set. A great app developer, a great digital marketing strategist, a great social media content specialist could work in the information industry, the media industry, consumer goods, a tech player. So the pool for great people, there is a lot of pull from many sides. So as an organization, you need to identify where are we going to get our people and how can we make us as an organization attractive to talent. So it's the other way around. I think many of us still grew up in a world where basically the employer was, I'm offering money anyway. What else do I have to offer, right? People, if they, provide the skill set that I want them to provide, they can be happy if they work with us. Well, that's going to be a very different mindset right now, because you need to figure out what your value proposition as an organization is for someone who could also go to Microsoft, Google, Facebook, or some digital startup. And then also the leadership development that I also touched upon before really means figuring out ways to help your leaders, empower them, and that is ultimately my mission at CUNY, developing these leaders in a way that help them become more effective in driving innovation and in managing change. Because yes, you can have a kind of natural talent for leadership and change management, but there are many, many things you can learn about it. And if you don't invest in your leaders to learn these things, you kind of set them up for failure, which is not what a responsible boss should do to their team. The second point that I wanted to make is give product leaders responsibility and resources. One kind of sad thing that I see happen from time to time is someone putting a chief product officer or director of digital product or SVP of product innovation in charge and basically saying, oh yeah, you're high up at the table, but no, you're not going to be part of the management meeting, the weekly one. You also sadly don't have a budget because, we can take it away from someone else. Oh, and you don't have a team. You have dotted lines. Well, it's perfectly understandable that in matrix organizations nowadays, dotted lines are a reality and shared budgets are a reality, and that's not necessarily bad per se. If you don't give someone access to, I'd say, legacy power at all, that will make it very hard for him or her to be successful as a product leader. So don't leave it as an empty statement, make some commitment as an organization. Find the sweet spot between data-driven processes and gut feeling. Now, that is what I meant before when I said you can oversteer towards data. Now, I don't see that many organizations, that many legacy organizations oversteering in that direction, but I do see it happen. And I feel finding that, balancing that steering wheel in exactly the right way is something that's absolutely important for organizations of all kinds and industries, basically. Collaborate internally and externally. If I had to pick one kind of mindset thing that I think is really important for success nowadays, it's really the mindset of collaboration. Collaboration with other teams in your organization, collaboration with other organizations in the industry, and I think an event like this is such a fabulous opportunity for this because it brings people together who might traditionally see the other as competitors, but who can learn so much from each other. Because the problems that we are trying to solve here are big problems, and no organization, not even the biggest one, is going to be able to solve all of them themselves. So collaboration is really absolutely fundamental. And last but not least, there is a big temptation to do everything. We need to have a Bitcoin-based app, and we need to be on any social network from TikTok to Snapchat, and we need to have someone who runs artificial intelligence-driven products and do a VR and AR app that lets our clients walk through our showroom. It is all very tempting, and it's all very fancy, and a lot of consultants are going to try to make a lot of money by selling you things and persuading you that this is the one thing that is going to save you. Now, if we learned one thing about innovation with a lot of research over the last 20 or so years is there won't be one silver bullet. Identify the 2 or 3 things that align well with your strategic responsibilities, with your brand, have an educated and extensive discussion about that, and then explicitly say no to the other things. It's not going to be the organization that does all the little innovation bubbles and that covers all of them that is going to be successful. It's going to be the organization that fosters an innovation-friendly mindset in general and then aligns their innovation process with some strategic initiatives that they really focus upon. Last but not least, superficial changes are, and that is what I touched upon in my last sentence, not going to be enough. Without culture change in your organization, without taking a long-term view, you're not going to be able to drive the product culture change per se. Thank you very much. I think we have time for some questions, or do you? No, we don't.
But you're going to be around?
I'm going to be around, yeah. Thank you very much.
Anita will be around, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions while she's with us. Thank you, Anita.